good afternoon to Israeli people. I hope that everybody is safe due to the current situation. And it's such an early morning for my friends in the United States. And also, probably it's a little good evening to people living in Japan. Welcome to my podcast. This is Hannah Klein. I am an author and also I have a blog on my page today. As I have posted on social media, I have invited a renowned historian, Dr. Ofir Haivry, back on my podcast as a guest. I am very honored and I feel very fortunate as well. Um, so, so for those who do not know about him, I would like to introduce him a little. Dr. Ofir Haivry is the vice president of the Herzl Institute, and he is also a member of the Council of Higher Education in Israel. He has a lot of titles. Today, we will be discussing Zionism, basically, not as a political movement, but I have certain questions. And also, I would like to ask him about the organization he's involved, the Herzl Institute, and Hanukkah in Israel. He was talking about Hanukkah in Israel different from, American Jews, the last time. So I'm going to ask him how his Hanukkah has been. And lastly, he mentioned that he would be introducing January 1st, which is important to Christian people, the day Jesus Christ was circumcised. So he will be talking about it. This year's Hanukkah started on December 25th, which is also Christmas, and it will last until January 2nd. Still, I have to remind everyone, well, those who listen to this podcast, that there are hostages in Gaza who cannot enjoy the gatherings of Hanukkah with their families, and their families missed someone because they are in Gaza. It's very sad, and I believe it is very important to think of the hostages and their families. So, I would like to welcome today's guest. Welcome, Ofir. It's always very nice to have you here, and especially in the season. It's Hanukkah and Christmas season. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Can you see me? Really hear me?
Yes, I do. Okay? Yes, everything is fine. So, how's the situation right now? Like I heard so many missile, alerts over the past few days in Tel Aviv area.
Well, the most of the proxies of Iran
Mm.
have been, in fact, destroyed. So what remains is in Yemen,
Ah.
and so they are shooting basically one missile in the middle of the night. It's not doing anything, but it's keeping everyone a bit, let's say 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, waking us up, and we go to the safe room.
Uh-huh.
In 10 minutes we go back to sleep.
Oh.
So in objective terms,
Mm-hmm.
there is no one really hurt or any very serious damage.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just an attempt, on part of the Iranian and the proxies
Mm-hmm.
to show that they still have some, it's like an octopus that like 3 or 4 of its hands has been cut off. So there are 1 or 2 that stay. But it's really, it doesn't represent serious danger in any way to Israel. It's just
Oh,
kind of
good, good.
bothering.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's good.
that
Well,
is it.
yeah, like I also hear like the terrorist attacks, and some attempts in Bethlehem. I think that was last night or something, to ruin the Christmas, like church service. That was.
Well, as you know, Bethlehem is currently not under Israeli control. It's actually
Yes,
controlled by
exactly.
the Palestinian
Yeah,
Authority.
exactly.
So, in any case, it's not exactly Israel's purview to take care of it. But in general,
Yeah, I
I
felt
would say
really
that the
bad for the
situation
Christians, though. Yeah.
currently,
Mm-hmm. I felt really
yes,
bad
but
for
I'm
the.
saying in general,
Mm-hmm.
what?
I felt very bad
So,
for the Christians there. Yeah. So.
yes, but I would say in general, it's like all the main Iranian and jihadist groups have been dealt very strong blows.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, they are trying to stir up some something in order to show that they are still alive.
Uh,
But it's more, it's not, qualitatively very important. It simply
mm-hmm.
shows, in a way, I think, it's their impotence
Mm.
because they, they are unable to do anything bothersome against Israel, so they attack the Palestinian Authority, which
Oh.
means that they are, in a sense, they are attacking themselves.
Uh-huh.
But undermining other Arab governments, or even the stupid attacks against Christians in Bethlehem, but also in Syria
Oh,
in the last
yes,
few days.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
But all these are kind of again they are expressions of impotence, because what does it mean uh, to disrupt the Christmas prayer? What does
Yeah,
it
exactly.
achieve? It's not even it's not even a political goal or anything like that. So I mean, to me, it looks like someone who is unable to do anything and tries to make some noise in order to show that he's still alive. But
Do you see Khamenei's posts about Zionism? It's like, it's like MF, but like he makes like, evil Zionists, blah blah blah, those kinds of things. He started
well,
doing on his own now.
no, I find that the less power Iran has,
Yes.
the more posts they put on. Meaning, when you are capable of doing harm, you don't have to talk that much. But since there is a very famous movie
Uh-huh.
from I think 40 or 50 years ago
Uh-huh.
called Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's like a comedy movie, and
Oh.
at a certain point there are two like medieval knights that fight each other, and
Uh-huh.
one of them cuts the both hands of the other one.
Oh.
So the one without hands says, "Where are you going? I'm not finished fighting." Understand? So like he hasn't got any arms anymore, but he's saying it's not finished. So it's the same. It's a kind of empty threats, because if when Iran had the capabilities
Mhm.
to threat or to have some action,
Mhm.
then it didn't have to make all these declarations. So to
Oh.
me, it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah, I get that impression, you know. I get that impression because it sounds ridiculous that he's doing it. And also, after this war started, it was so drastic that the foreign minister died, in a plane crash. All of a sudden, he visited Japan actually right before the plane crash, and he talked about
The
the
prime minister.
situation. Yeah, no, the foreign minister, and but
No, the guy who died in the plane crash was the prime minister.
the prime minister.
Sorry,
Oh,
he
okay.
was the president.
Oh,
The
yes,
president.
yes.
Maybe
He's the
the foreign
president.
minister was with him. Yeah.
Yes, yes. But I just see uh I just, I really love, I'm not sure if I call Zionist or not because I don't live in, Israel. But, my Christian friend, who lives in, Israel calls himself, I'm a proud Zionist. so,
Okay.
so, and, there's, famous saying by Herzl, a lot of saying, by Herzl. And I really love his, what he says. And um, do you think that, like the ideology of Zionism, like creates or supports Israel?
In many ways, it does.
Hmm.
Let me explain a bit of the about the background.
Yeah, I hope
So,
you do really, because
uh,
there's a lot of misunderstandings that Japanese have. I really am disappointed about this, but I hope that you explain
so
this further.
I can try. Yes. So the point is that let's say, what is Zionism?
Hmm.
Zionism is specifically a political movement created by Theodor Herzl. Uh,
Yes.
uh, we can even point to a certain date, which
Hmm.
is August 1897.
Hmm.
Now, basically, Zionism is the national movement of
Yes.
the Jewish people
Hmm.
to create its own state. So the question is, why would you even need it? Because in some cases, like Japan,
Hmm.
Japan doesn't need that because it exists as a state for many, many hundreds of years. So basically, there is no need for a kind of Japanese Zionism because people in Japan live in Japan, they are Japanese,
Hmm.
but you have to understand that in some cases, some nations
Hmm.
were, for a very long time,
Hmm.
they were basically oppressed or conquered by other nations.
Yes.
Sometimes by one nation, but sometimes they were divided between many. So
Hmm.
one example is uh, Italy, which
Ah, yes,
for
right,
many
right.
centuries was occupied by other nations,
Yes.
and the so the national movement
Hmm.
of Italians,
Hmm.
in order to create an Italian state, was
Hmm.
called the Risorgimento, the
Um.
renewal or the rebirth.
Hmm.
Now, the point with Zionism
Hmm.
is that it's necessary because of the special circumstances, the unique circumstances
Hmm.
of the Jewish people. Because in many cases, in most cases, I would say, even nations that are conquered by others,
Hmm.
they remain physically in the same place
Hmm.
and they have a united political structure.
Hmm.
The, one example could be Japan
Hmm.
after the Second World War,
Hmm.
meaning it was occupied for a period by the West, but
Hmm.
the Japanese remained in Japan, in the same
Hmm.
land,
Yeah.
and it remained Japan. But in some cases, and very extremely in the case of the Jewish people, many centuries ago, actually, almost 2,000 years ago,
Hmm.
after they were conquered by the Roman Empire,
Hmm.
they were dispersed. And with time, dispersed again and again, so that they weren't concentrated not only not concentrated in their own land anymore, but actually they were very dispersed. So
Yes.
there wasn't even one country where
Yeah.
there was like 30% or 20% of the population that was Jewish. It was very evenly distributed,
Mm-hmm.
if we might say so.
Yes.
So this meant a few things. One, that the 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 movement to recreate a Jewish state was
Mm-hmm.
appeared to many unnatural because a lot of people look at the situation and
Mm-hmm.
think that what is also what may be,
Mm-hmm.
and of course that's not always true. Some things that we see are actually going to change,
Mm-hmm.
but for many it's very difficult to see that. So this is the first element that for many Jews and non-Jews, it was a bit difficult to imagine
Mm-hmm.
how such a state would be created. Even the
Oh.
place was debated
Mm-hmm.
because when Herzl started the movement,
Mm-hmm.
he wrote a book in 1896 called The Jewish State, and
Yes.
he mentioned that there were various proposals for an idea of a Jewish state where the location should be, because some people said easier it would be to put it in some land where there's almost no one,
Uh-huh.
and let's find some place in Argentina or in Siberia. It seems simplest.
Oh,
But
okay.
Herzl argued that in fact,
Mm-hmm.
creating a new state and all the hardships that would be involved in it,
Mm-hmm.
the easiest or the most rational way would be to create it in the place where the people are attached to, because in that way they will be willing to go through a long time and many hardships, and that is
And
why
there are
he
indigenous.
proposed.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
there are indigenous like Jewish people, right? As well, like
yes.
in the
Look,
land.
the question is always, I tell you,
Mm-hmm.
in a way, indigenous is a very misapplied term, because
Yes. Okay.
in truth, all humans are not indigenous, meaning eventually someone came from someone.
Yeah.
Like the Native Americans
Mm-hmm.
are not Native Americans, they came there 20,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Japanese are native Japanese, but maybe they came to Japan 2,000 years ago before maybe there were other
Well,
people,
see,
right?
yeah, a lot of actually like DNA composition is very similar to those from Korean Peninsula, but over the past, passing of the years, like the DNA has changed, but there has been
Yeah,
populations transitions between Korean Peninsula
exactly.
and Japan. Yeah.
I guess, yes, I agree. And we know that very large populations that used to be in Manchuria or Mongolia moved to China. And by the way, most Arab countries, Arabs
Yes.
come from Arabia. So, so the Arabs
Um.
in, let's say, Algeria or Egypt or Iraq are not Arabs in the sense that they're originally from there. Because if they're Arabian, they came
Uh-huh.
from Arabia, which is another place,
Ah.
right? So it's the same virtually everywhere. The Turks
Mhm.
in Turkey, today there's a country called Turkey,
Mhm.
are they indigenous? Because they came 500 years ago from Central Asia, right? So
Well, that's
I don't like this.
okay. Yeah. That's what
So
actually
I know
somebody, some yeah, that's what actually like, the Kurds, the Kurdish, historian was, like very much
yes,
criticizing, Turkish people, like harshly, and he was talking, about, the origin of the Turks. But anyways,
yeah,
just please go ahead.
naturally. But the point is that in many ways it's very difficult to. I mean, the terminology of
Mm-hmm.
natives a lot of times it's used in a very inexact way,
Ah,
meaning
yes, that's
the
true.
fact that some population speaks a language,
Mm.
let's say people in Hungary speak Hungarian,
Mm.
which is a Central Asian language.
Mm.
Does it mean that all the people in Hungary came originally from Central Asia,
Mm.
or there was a small group that came there
Mm.
and the local population adopted this language?
Mm.
it's difficult to know. But what I'm saying is, in general, I don't like to use this language of natives because it's very inexact. But to answer your question, there were always some Jewish population that remained in the land of Israel. But as I mentioned, because of the deportation, so at various periods it was between 50%, and sometimes it was 20%, and sometimes it was 5% of the population. It changed. There were various conquests, under the Crusaders, the Jewish population became very small. Later, it grew again. So, but there was a continuity of Jewish presence in the land. However, the number of Jews living in the land of Israel, let's say 200 years ago, was about 1 or 2% of the world Jewish population. As I'm saying, Jews were very scattered all around. So there wasn't a place where you can say already 30% of Jews live there, so let's move the others. So it had to be, at any event, somewhere at the Jewish state had to be a place where most Jews would emigrate to eventually. So they would choose to live there. And Herzl and others proposed that this would be the ancient land of Israel, because as the original and the symbolic homeland of the Jews, it would be the one where eventually the Jews would be most willing to move to and suffer some kind of hardship, economic, security, and so on. And it was correct. And indeed, I don't think that there's an example in history where the population of a country is, the majority of the population is made of people that emigrated into it in a very, very short period of time. So let's say about in Herzl's time, so about 120 years ago, 125 years ago, let's say about 1 or 2% of Jews in the world lived in the land of Israel. Today, it's more than 50%. So, as you see, basically, most Jews in the world today live in Israel. Now,
I see.
To understand this process, let's think for a moment about the ideas of Herzl, meaning in what it consists. So basically, Herzl had to come up with solutions, with ideas to solve a few problems at the same time. One is the Jews were dispersed in a way that some people said they are not really a nation, they are a religion, like let's say Buddhism or
well, in case of Japan, it's Shintoism, right? Probably like Shintoism, like 99%.
So people argued Jews are only a religion; they are not a nation. Some people said that. So Herzl had to make the case that they are a nation, and they lacked some of the classic markers of a nation, because usually when people say, what is a nation, what is the Japanese nation, what is the Italian nation, and so on, they use 2 or 3 let's say characteristics, like people having the same language, people living in the same land, having the same culture. So the Jews lacked a few of these markers. They had the same religion and culture, but apart of that, almost no Jews spoke Hebrew, and they were dispersed all over. I mean, many knew it, but they knew it as a kind of, it was like a kind of liturgical language, like Sanskrit in India.
Oh yes.
Many people learn it, but it's not their natural. They don't go to the supermarket and buy bread with it. So in the same way, there were like, let's say, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 million people, Jews, that knew Hebrew, but they knew it either liturgically or I would say linguistically, but they didn't use it. They didn't speak it with the children in in this sense.
Like
So
colloquially,
this is one
right?
marker.
Yeah, like
Exactly. There was no colloquial Hebrew. Like Latin today is not
yes, yes,
colloquial.
yes, yes.
There is no native Latin speakers.
Uh-huh.
People speak Latin in the
Mm.
church and some educated people, but
Mm.
it does not exist as anyone's specific language.
Mm.
So uh, um, basically, Herzl has had to confront these problems and another problem, a political one,
Mm-hmm.
that was that there didn't exist any central political institution that all Jews were. So, how could you even know what is the political will of the Jews? Because let's say that let's say in Korea, even before it was independent, you could say, okay, people who speak Korean and live in this area of Korea, they are the Koreans. We can ask them what they want. But in the case of the Jews, it was impossible. Jews lived in Russia, in the Ottoman Empire, in the US, in Europe, all over. So this meant that it was both practically and intellectually difficult to start a national movement in this case. What would be the authority? Who would be the one to start all this process? So, some nations have like let's say a king, even a king in exile, so they can say, okay, he is the symbol of our nation. In the case of the Jews, you didn't have any central authority, even religion. There wasn't even a religious authority, like let's say the Pope. The Jews don't have a Pope, so we didn't have any central point where we could start. So this practical and intellectual problem was the first problem that Herzl had to overcome. So he came with a theory that it's called the manager of the business. It is a theory that he came up out of, I would say, legal theory, and it transmitted this legal theory into a kind of political theory. So, what is this theory? This theory is known in several legal traditions. In the Roman tradition, it's called as the negatorio gestio. So, negatorio means business, and gestor is like the manager. So, the manager of the business. What does it mean? It means that in cases where there is some kind of business or thing or person that cannot take care of itself, if you come and assist it, although you have no authorization for that, you can be authorized afterwards. The best example is this. Let's say that I'm walking on the street and I see your house, and you are not in your house. And suddenly I see that your house is on fire. Am I allowed to break in and try to stop the fire? I didn't get your okay, but it's reasonable to think that I would do it to stop the fire, right? Maybe even I would bring water and put it on the fire. Maybe bringing the water, I will ruin your carpet, let's say. But still, so the question is, would the court say, Mr. Ofir, you are wrong. You broke into a house, and so you should be punished? Or would the court say, no, you are a very good citizen. You saw a problem, and you
Sorry,
and you saved the house.
Could you give me one moment, please? I'm sorry. Just a minute. Yeah, it's working. Yes. So yeah, could you continue?
So I was saying that in the case that again that I broke into a house in order to save it from a fire or flood or anything, the question is again if the courts would see my intervention as a breaking in, breaking the law, or actually I fulfilled the real purpose of the law and I saved someone's house, property, life. So this doctrine, this legal doctrine, that is called in Roman law negotiatorium gestio, and in the common law, the Anglo-American tradition, it's called quasi-contract, and there are other examples. Basically states that if there is a situation where an event, a situation where someone cannot take care of himself, let's say again, it's a minor that owns has come, a property has been inherited by a minor. The minor cannot defend the property, and some people want to break in and take possession of it. Can you actually be active in order to defend it, although you are not certified by any authority to do it? So this kind of authority, the negotiatorium gestio, the managing of the business, this idea was used by Herzl. He transmitted this legal idea into the political realm. What did he say? He said that the Jewish people is helpless at this moment. He was talking about 1896, because it has no formal agent to take care of its own matters. So when it's being attacked, when it's being provoked, but when it's being oppressed, there was no one to speak or to defend it. So in order to initiate this process, he proposed, it's a kind of self-appointment. So he called for the Zionist Congress in 1897. He convened the first Congress, the first Zionist Congress in Basel, in Switzerland. He convened to it delegates, Jewish delegates from all over the world, and they created the Zionist organization. This first step was not authorized by anyone. There were no elections, because who would elect? How they would elect? So this was in a kind of de facto, and then this organization said to the Jews of the world, now you can choose if join or not. Now it could have been the case.
Well, is it like, is it like joining a group, and, the Zionist group has a law, like, like based on their organisms, in a way.
Yes, it is simply an association that was created.
Yes.
But it was created, usually an association is created with authority by someone. But in this case, there was no authority to give the authority. So it's a kind of self-appointment. And this theory argued that there should be an organization, a gestor, that was the language of Herzl, to take care of the business of the Jews. And so he set up the organization, and it was up to the Jewish people to see if they would join it or not. And if no one would have been interested in this organization, then Zionism would have been dead immediately. So we couldn't know what would happen. But in fact, not only very large groups of Jews did decide to become involved with the Zionist organization, but also no alternative was organized, meaning there could have been, in theory, another group that said, we are the anti-Zionist organization. But nothing like that became organized. So in a sense, very rapidly, Zionism was seen by Jews, even those who are against Zionism, they regarded Zionism as the authority to respect or to fight against. But it became the only central body of Jews around the world. And more than that, countries, governments all over the world that wanted to address Jewish problems started to treat the Zionist organization and Herzl as the spokesman for the Jews. So Herzl started to meet with various important functionaries of very important governments. First, some ministers. Then he met with the Turkish Sultan, with the German Emperor, with the Prime Minister of Russia, the Russian Empire. He met with the Pope. He met with the British Prime Minister. So very, very rapidly, he succeeded in creating, I would say, a kind of Jewish agency representing. He was regarded as representing the Jewish people. Unfortunately, after only 7 years of activity, Herzl died. He was only 44 years old.
Oh yes, he died. Yeah, he passed away very young.
Very young. Yes, in 1904 he died. So at that point, Zionism had achieved some recognition from some governments, but nothing more. And for a time, it looked like the idea of Zionism was a nice idea that came to nothing, and it would simply disappear. Meaning the Zionist organization continued to exist, but there was no prospect of any government or international institution giving voice to Zionism. And in the land of Israel, there were, I would say, 2% of the Jewish population. So it looked like a dead end for about 10 years after Herzl died. So between 1904 and 1914, probably most people that would have asked around the world about Zionism, they would have answered something like, yeah, it was a nice idea, but nothing came out of it. Right? However, in August 1914, 10 years after Herzl died, the First World War broke out. And very soon it changed all the international structure.
Oh,
Why?
yes.
For two reasons.
Yes.
One, it became very, very early on the case that the Western powers, meaning France and Britain, later they were joined by Italy and by US, and eventually also Japan. So all these allies, it was called the Tent, were on one side, and on the other side, there were Germany, Austro-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
And it became very clear that the result of the war, the empires, meaning especially the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian empires, would be split up. So the issue of the future of the Middle East became relevant. And in this context, the leadership of the Zionism offered the allies, meaning Britain mainly, to have Jewish battalions that would fight alongside the allies.
Yes,
eventually
right.
become a kind of allied nation. And then, after the war, the reward for supporting the allies would be the creation of a territory for a Jewish state from the old Ottoman Empire that was to be split up. So basically, there started all kinds of discussions, and already in 1915 there was a first Jewish regiment, a group of soldiers within the British Army, and in 1917 and 1918 there were created more and more regiments. If the war would have gone on, there would have been 8 or 10 regiments eventually. So along these lines, in November 1917, the foreign minister of Great Britain,
Mm-hmm.
Arthur Balfour,
Mm-hmm. Ah, yes, yes, right.
sent a letter, the famous Balfour Declaration. And in that declaration, he indicated that the government of Britain is favorable to the idea of eventually creating a Jewish national home in the land of Israel. So, after this letter, in a sense, you can say that Zionism became an ally of the Allies.
Mm.
But
But you know what?
the
What
Zionists,
it's sorry to interrupt you, but uh, in my impression, the young generations, like those in 20s, come to Japan, who has come to Japan, say that Japan is a very democratic country, and and so forth. But in my impression, you know, um, you know, it's like very hierarchical that Japanese society is still, but it sounds that like Israel is more democratic to me. And it's different, in probably the way like the society is organized, as you mentioned. But it's, yeah, I think that uh like you mentioned that Japan is different, but at the end of like Edo era to like during like after 1868, 1868, yeah, to transition to a new government, it was a very difficult time for Japan. So I don't think that Japanese people should feel like too foreign, about just um, having a new form of government in a sense. I really think, and yeah,
okay, could be.
yeah, but it's a theoretical thing. So I just please go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, I understand. You could say that the Japanese had at least two transitions.
Yes.
One is the um, called the Meiji Restoration, so one period,
Mm-hmm.
and another clearly after the Second World War, where the current constitution was created. So
Yes.
two
Yes.
very big changes in history, naturally. So you are correct. But what I wanted to stress at this point is that in 1917,
Mm-hmm.
when the Zionist organization received the Balfour Declaration from Britain,
Mm-hmm.
it did not say, okay, that's enough,
Mm-hmm.
but actually Zionism started a whole kind of diplomatic effort
Mm.
to get the acceptance of all the big powers
Oh.
for the Zionist idea. So a very few people, almost everyone has heard of the Balfour Declaration. It's very famous. But people don't know that very soon afterwards, there was a declaration by the French government,
Mm-hmm.
by the Italian government,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually
Mm-hmm.
by the Japanese government.
Oh.
So there is a letter,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of Balfour Declaration of
Mm-hmm.
Japan,
Mm-hmm.
in which the Japanese government, the Japanese foreign minister
Yes.
at that time, in 1919 or 1920, I think, I can
Mm-hmm.
find it if you want, declared
Mm-hmm.
similarly to the Balfour Declaration
Oh.
that the imperial government of Japan is favorably or looking with favor to the idea of the possibility of establishing a Jewish national home in areas of the former Ottoman Empire. So there is also this, and during the international conferences in 1919, 1920, 1922,
Mm-hmm.
there were several of these conferences that rearranged the region. Eventually, the British government
Mm-hmm.
received an area
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, that that became a British mandate.
Mm-hmm.
That it was directed, intended to
Mm-hmm.
be the Jewish national home.
Mm-hmm.
And in this area, Britain ruled for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
while there was Jewish immigration and Jewish building new settlements,
Mm-hmm.
new institutions, and so on,
Mm-hmm.
and gradually laid down the ground for creating this making the land Jewish again, meaning with a Jewish majority.
Yeah, it
And
was amazing process in my impression. It was, the
yes,
how it was developed,
I agree.
Yeah.
So, but in fact, it was three processes
Mm-hmm.
coming together, three different. I won't say independent. They were interdependent,
Mm-hmm.
but still, it was one the creation of a political authority for the Jewish people. One. Secondly, it was the revival of the Jewish language, the Hebrew language.
Ah,
Sorry.
yes.
So, so again, if there was no revival of the Hebrew language, then Israelis would today be speaking English or
some
German
some other
or some
language.
other
Yeah.
language, right?
Yeah.
So you should understand that as a living language, there is no precedent in the history of the world of a language that was not a day-to-day language becoming again the language, and it was achieved mainly by not by universities or by educated people, but
Mm-hmm.
actually the opposite way. Uh, there was a lot of effort in the kindergartens
Oh,
to
well, that's interesting.
there was creation of Hebrew speaking kindergartens for the little kids who are like 2, 3, 4 years old,
Hmm.
5 years old, and these kindergarten teachers spoke in the kindergarten only in Hebrew. So those children grew up speaking Hebrew as
Oh,
if it was their native
native
language.
language. Oh.
So when they were going back home, the parents were hearing the children speaking in Hebrew. The parents didn't know Hebrew or knew it very. So the parents too had to learn the language
Oh.
in order to be able to understand what the kids are speaking about.
Okay.
And so, in a sense, instead of the parents teaching the children,
Mm-hmm.
in this sense, we have the children teaching the parents
Oh.
this new language. And so, in about 20 years, when those first kindergarten children finished high school
Mm-hmm.
after 18 years, 19, 20 years, it was the first generation that could be defined as native Hebrew speakers. So this is how this great revolutionary event occurred, virtually unheard of in world history, a complete revival of a language that was not, it
Well,
was
that's
regarded as
interesting
a
as
dead
an
language.
education as well. Yeah, that's
Yes.
very interesting from an educational perspective, I think. Yeah.
This is totally an educational effort
Mm-hmm.
that combined with a political one, but it wasn't a political effort, meaning it wasn't uh, it wasn't originated as a political struggle. It was
Mm-hmm.
originated as a cultural event, educational event
Mm-hmm.
that succeeded. I would tell you more than this. Herzl and most of the leadership, sorry, of the of Zionism was very skeptical about the possibility of having most Jews speaking Hebrew. In his book, The Jewish State, he wrote that it looks a bit unrealistic
Mm-hmm.
to expect that most Jews will be able to speak Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, eventually, when we will have a Jewish majority,
Yeah.
we will see if most Jews are speaking English,
Oh.
then English will be their national language. If they speak German, and so on. Even Herzl and the leadership was quite
Mm-hmm.
skeptical about the
Mm-hmm.
possibility of having the whole population
Mm-hmm.
speaking Hebrew. But so this was the second great achievement. And the third achievement was, in a sense, the reclaiming of the land, meaning uh, most of Israel in 120 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it was swamps and empty areas. So basically, uh, the Jews bought lands. They bought the least valuable lands because no one wanted to sell the valuable land. So
Oh.
a lot of desert land, rocky land, swamps, and the Jewish groups started new settlements
Mm.
and started to work the land and gradually reclaimed very large areas. And so I would say that 90% of cities and towns and villages in Israel are new, meaning they are created there are some old cities like Jerusalem, Safed,
Mm.
but I would say that 90%, 80% of the population lives in villages that were created and built by Zionism.
Mm.
Just to show the extent, and also I would say that most, I mean, people don't know that about Israel, but 100 years ago,
Mm.
there were virtually no trees in Israel because
Yeah, it was
very
a
few,
desert land,
there were,
right? Yeah. As I
because
see, like.
the desertificated and the few areas that were where there were woods
Mm-hmm.
had been cut down to
Mm.
build the railway
Mm.
around the start of the century. So basically, you have no trees in Israel that are more
Mm.
than 150 years old. Virtually no trees.
No.
So what the Zionist agency made, it created a special national fund, Karen Kayemet it's called, to plant new forests.
Mm.
And today you have more than 1 billion trees in Israel that are, all of them are planted. If you come to Israel and see a forest, it's not a natural forest. It has been planted
Mm.
and it's become a forest now. The trees are very tall and you see animals there, but it's not it's not ancient. It's it was
Wow.
created by Zionism.
Oh.
So
Wow.
so I would say that this is the third element,
Mm.
the reclaiming of the land, the changing of the landscape. So you have these three elements: the political aspect, the cultural language aspect, and the changing of the landscape coming together
Mm-hmm.
to create Israel and the success of Zionism. And I would say that if any of them was lacking, then Israel could not have been created, really.
I see. Well, see, like I was actually going to visit Israel like in 2000 like 7 or something. And I think the war started, or war broke out and I was going to go with this my friend Mr. Harry and in February and I was like you know and I wanted to go alone but my mom was like like I'm not sure about that but after the war just I just decided that I will visit Israel and I also would like to learn Hebrew and actually I was learning Hebrew before October 7th and then this woman was lived in French, and we were like having lesson online, um, and then this Ura, declared that this Lazzarini said that he would like to have an operating office in Japan, so that Ura operates mainly in Japan. And it was like, what is going on here? It's like, no, I was, I was going to forget about Ura. Like it was like long, 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 long time ago for me, and it was like all of a sudden, like all the nightmare just came back to me and said like, no. like, and I just started to like make posts like on Twitter, little X now, but like former Twitter, like, like no armor because they're terrorists. But like I asked around, like people, like my friend from army actually said, it's terrible. Like, and I heard a lot of terrible things, in real. And I realized that it was terrible. And I was complaining about that. And then October 7th happened, and like, it was so shocking to me. And I just could not, just, my mind was just went blank, and I just, didn't have space for learning a new language anymore. And I was like,
I understand. It's hard. It's hard.
and because if you have seen ISIS, or people like who do terrible things in the Middle East, these Islamic radicals, we can imagine what's going to happen, to the Israeli people, the victims. And it was so hard,
We don't have to imagine. Unfortunately, on October 7th, we got an example. A lot of Israelis treat it as a one day back to the days of the Holocaust. So you have one day where you have all these crazy people just killing Jews just because they are Jews, meaning children, babies, everything. So unfortunately, we had the opportunity to see what happens when these crazy Islamist fanatics get away. And this is why Israel is very, very, I would say, harsh now on its unwillingness to compromise until it really destroys these dangers to our existence.
Well, I think it, ultimately, I remember 9/11, you know, when, this Twin Tower went down. And, that was like when I was like 20 or something. But I mean, since then, it was, a battle against uh, the terrorism, basically, to the United States, military. And I mean, you know, Israeli, military is always cooperative to the U.S. military, and but it has been terrible, and it's just, what you know people have gone through in the Middle East was terrible, including those who serve. The service member was treated terrible by Islamists because, they were the enemies. But, I don't really understand the mindset, of Gazans, treating that terrible. Like, how come they can treat, people terribly? And one problem with me right now is that there are, like, those who say, like the journalists who do, documentaries on Gazans or Palestinians, like they say, they call, like, Israelis like colonialists. I saw their posts, but and they invite, the former Japanese terrorist to the Japanese TV station. And she says, like, she was actually saying free Palestine in 1970s. And, these people, like, these, like, college protesters, I mean, I'm sorry. I just cannot understand them anymore. And, it's, but, like, what actually I found on some clips, I just don't even want to talk about, is what the mindset of these uh, imams, radical imams, telling how they want to treat Israelis. They are in the United States talking about this, and I just it's still really hard, like, um for me to understand uh why they can do that to people. And also, it's really hard for me. It was really hard for me when I was young to understand why Jewish people had to go through the Holocaust. I mean, it's the same thing, probably, but it was so terrible in one day. And like, a young girl was cut off, like, one arm. Like, it's it's just, I mean, it's just, I cannot understand the mindset of the Japanese journalists talking about the Gaza health ministry. They do that all the time. So, it just, it's so. And they don't, they differentiate, seem to differentiate, Zionists and Jewish people. Classify them. But I don't actually, I reached conclusions. See, I didn't just call myself, Zionist, but I really loved Herzl, and Herzl's, writings, and also from my my youth. And I didn't understand why it was wrong in the first place for them to call uh, Zionists as colonists. It was like, it's so hard for me to understand. And like,
Look, like I said before about the term native, the term colonial
uh-huh.
in this context is simply used in a way
Hmm.
that is on purpose. It is confusing because
Hmm.
it has nothing to do, in fact, with Zionism. However,
Hmm.
because most people all over the world, in Japan, in the US, so on, they learn that colonialism and imperialism are bad, and so naturally, if you put if you define someone as colonialist, he's bad, and it's not very relevant if the actual facts are true or not true. So, in the case of Zionism, you cannot call it colonialism in truth, because colonialism means that one country is a colonial power and it takes over another territory, another
Yeah,
area, another country,
exactly.
and settles its own colonists there.
Hmm.
So let's say,
Yeah, Japan did,
colonialism is,
right?
yeah, so colonialism is that Britain would put its own people in
Hmm.
Kenya.
Hmm.
Or let's say Japan
Hmm.
has people settling in Korea, so on.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is colonialism, let's
Yeah.
say. But in the case of Zionism,
Hmm.
there was no mother country, meaning the Zionists did not come, they were not sent by Britain or the US or Japan or Russia.
Hmm.
They came out of their own will. They were not part of the imperial population.
Hmm.
They came each from another country, and also they came to their own country. So
Hmm.
how can Jews being Jews meaning
It's
coming
an
from
ancient
Judea?
homeland to
How can
Jewish
a
people,
Jew
right? Yeah.
be a colonist in Judea, since Jew means from Judea?
Yeah.
You understand? It's like saying that a Japanese is a colonist in Japan. He cannot be a colonist in Japan because Japan is the land of the Japanese. So a Japanese living in Japan cannot be a colonist in his own country. The same thing with the Jews. If they come back to their land, how can they be colonists? But the
Yeah,
Islamic
that's
view.
true. That's true. After the war, Japanese came back from a lot of colonies, including Brazil, even,
Yes,
and I just do not I just want to tell that Japan was owned colonies, and these people like young journalists needs to understand, or maybe like those in 50s need to understand, they were in their past generations could have done something wrong, because Japan has a lot of problems with Australian Veterans Associations, UK's Veterans Associations,
yes,
also ultimately the all allies like Dutch, Veterans Associations, because we killed a lot of people, you know, and I mean, before
yes,
talking about
but
others, like just face our facts,
you are right. But the point is that people in Japan have to understand
Mm,
that Japan, after the war, accepted
mm,
the idea that Japan is for the Japanese and
mm,
Australia for Australians and so on. So, but the point is that the Islamic worldview does not accept that. The Islamic worldview thinks that every place
mm,
that was ever governed
mm.
by the by the by an Islamic government or by an Arab ruler
Ah, yeah, I would
is
like to
part
hear that.
of
Yes.
their territories. It's like 500 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
the Chinese argued that Japan is a vassal of China.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so it will be like today the Chinese government saying actually Japan is part of China.
Yeah,
So this kind of argument, it's ridiculous today, right?
yeah.
But actually, the Islamist argument against Israel,
Mm-hmm.
the Arab argument against Israel is that no, this land was ruled by Muslims some time ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So it means that it has to remain Muslim and Arab. Why? Because for them, it's not about reality, but
Mm-hmm.
Islamism and Arab nationalism is
Mm-hmm.
actually an imperial view. It's an
No.
imperialist view. So, so the irony is that
Mm-hmm.
Israelis, Zionists, are regarded as colonialists,
Mm-hmm.
while in fact it's the opposite. They are defending their native land from Arab imperialists. But the imperialists come to Japan
Mm-hmm.
and say, no, the Zionism is colonialism, and many Japanese do not know really a lot about the history of Israel, of
Well, I think a lot of
Arab
people do
countries.
not understand the relationship between, Israel and other Arab nations, except for like certain nations like Bahrain or, UAE, So,
Yes,
so
but
it's,
but again, among the Arabs,
mm-hmm,
you always had two views. One
mm-hmm,
view was realistic,
mm-hmm,
saying maybe we don't like Israel, maybe we don't like the Jews, but we have to live with them.
mm-hmm,
And this is the reality with Egypt and Jordan that have peace treaties with Israel,
mm-hmm,
and also many Gulf states now, the Arab Emirates, maybe Saudi
mm-hmm.
Arabia. They they may like us, they might not like us, but they regard Israel as a reality. But most campuses, most intellectuals in the Arab world still are connected to this idea that Israel's very existence is somehow an affront to Islamic identity,
Mm-hmm.
meaning Muslims all over the world have to hate Israel, and Israel is a kind of it's a kind of aggression against Islam. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, they are successful in feeding a lot of people in America, in Europe, in
Mm-hmm.
Japan, in China with this nonsense. As if a small nation of 10 million people like Israel is a
Mm-hmm.
threat to 400 million Arabs. It's weird, right?
It's weird.
It would be like saying, but I don't know, Singapore is a threat to China. This is nonsense. No one thinks that this is serious. What are we talking about? But unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
in the Muslim and Arab world, a lot of people are talking like that, and in order to make the thing more plausible,
Mm.
they come up with all those theories of Jewish dominance and Jewish control. So when someone says, "Look, there are 1 billion Muslims
Mm.
and only 10 million Jews in Israel," it doesn't look really a fair fight. So the Islamic side says usually things like, "No, but you see, Israel actually controls Europe. It controls America. It controls the
Ah.
media. It controls everything."
What is the
Which is
point of saying that? What is the point of
the
saying
point
that?
is
Mm.
the point is one. It plays into a lot of anti-Semitic beliefs.
Mm.
So people in the West who are anti-Semitic, uh, they start to think, wait a minute, uh, this makes sense because it fits with my belief
Mm.
that I hate Jews. So you have a kind of strange coalition
Mm.
of Muslims and anti-Semitic racists in the West that are united only by one thing, by their hate of Israel.
I don't understand it really, but you know what? They say that, They say that verbally, but I really do not understand their point of making it.
Well,
See, like, yeah, like, like they like to say like Jews control like the capital market, something like that. Just stop, Yeah, like but yeah, it's a weird, thought that these university students have, and I don't know where it came from, but it sounds like, it came from the faculty members to me. And
it is a very primitive kind of anti-Semitism, but it is being uh, adapted
mm,
to neo-Marxist terminology and all kind of anti-colonial discourse. So
mm,
basically, they are transmitting all these, I would say, fundamentally racist
mm,
views into this conflict, which is after all political.
mm,
But I understand what they are doing it because
mm,
I always say that if your argument is so weak
mm,
that you have to lie, it means
mm,
that your argument is not really worth anything.
mm,
But this is the case that they are indeed using all kind of lies about
mm.
Israel, and I mean sometimes they're successful with it, and people, I think some people around the world believe that nonsense.
Hmm. Oh, that's disappointing, really. It's disappointing because, uh, uh, yeah, it's very disappointing in a sense that, many people misunderstand the facts. And, many people misunderstand the situation of the war right now. And see, like, uh, see, Japan, like a lot of people talk about like this. Japan hasn't learned about the war at all. But, I realized that, they haven't maybe watched any international news. Like, I haven't been watching it since I was little because my grandmother was, like promoting it a lot. But, a lot of people seem to think that, especially the young generation, if we claim that we need peace, then there will be a peace. But, in case of like Israeli people, they need to understand how much Israeli people, want to attain peace, in Israel, the land of Israel. And also at the same time, I think it's very strange to me that Israel has been found that decades and decades ago, and there were like generations and generations of children brought up in the land of Israel, and I don't understand why the Arab nations don't recognize them.
Well, look, I think it's part of their failure of these countries to
Mm.
create a stable identity. For example,
Mm.
why are the Chinese so obsessed with Taiwan? After all, they have enough people, right? But I think that this obsession
Mm.
is connected to their own, I would say, a kind of insecurity
Mm.
based, in the regime itself. That I think that all kind of autocratic dictatorial regimes, since they cannot rest on the support of the people, they have to create some kind of other
Mm.
justification. And in
Mm.
many cases, creating a purported enemy or danger to
Mm.
the integrity of the nation is that answer. The same thing I think is true for North Korea. Why such
Mm.
a regime is so aggressive?
Oh, yeah, right.
Why does it have to send missiles against Japan?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. What does North Korea have to do with Japan today? Nothing.
Yeah.
Why does it have to? Why does it have to project such
Nuclear
kind of
missiles, right?
aggressiveness and right and a rhetoric of illegitimacy
Mm.
against Japan, against South Korea, and so on? So it's basically because this is what sustains the regime there. The
Mm.
dictator is using these ideas. So unfortunately, all Arab countries are dictatorships of one kind of
Oh.
another. So even the moderate ones, and certainly the not moderate ones, are
Mm.
dictatorships. And all these Arab countries, there is a ruler
Mm.
which have to justify why do I take the money of the people and build up a big army? The truth is
Oh.
that I need the army to sustain my power in government. But I cannot say that. So I say I'm fighting Israel. There is a danger from Israel.
Mm.
The Jews are taking our land.
Mm.
So this is what has built all these Arab countries into failed regimes. Basically, all the
Mm.
Arab republics have are failed states in, in one way or another. Either they're like kind of barely functioning bankrupt states,
Mm.
or they are totally failed states like Libya,
Yeah.
Yemen,
Yeah.
Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. They are split into several. It's like a feudal reality. Each of them
Mm.
has a few center of power,
Mm.
and they're fighting each other. And this, why is this? Because in the last 2 or 3 generations,
Mm.
instead of these governments investing in the population,
Mm.
they only invested in armies that would defend the rulers and in attacking Israel. So their
Oh.
only ideology is the hate for Israel. There is nothing positive. There is no positive ideology.
Mm.
Let's build up our country. Let's make
Mm.
ourselves richer, more prosperous, more successful.
Mm.
Uh, you know, there are about 400 Arab speakers in the
Mm.
Arab world. The number of books that are published in the Arab world and in Israel is the same number. So Israel, with 10 million people,
Mm.
publishes every year the same number of books that are published in all Arab countries together. So you have to think what's going on here. Why are why are the educational uh, achievements so poor? Does it mean that the Arabs are stupid? I don't believe so. Because
Mm.
an Arab that goes and lives in the US,
Mm.
many times he can be successful.
Mm.
So it's not something that has to do with being Arab. It has to do with the political regimes in these countries.
Mm.
And in these countries, there is a political regime that is built on sustaining a dictatorship
Mm.
by creating conflict elsewhere. And the best conflict for them is Israel
Mm.
because it draws into all kinds of Islamic dreams of glory that has nothing to do with the present. Instead of saying, I will invest in my country, I will make my country something that can manufacture cars, that manufacture computers, that create things like many other countries after the war. South Korea and Japan were poorer than many Arab countries and with almost no natural resources. And look now, and where these Arab countries, Algeria, Egypt, Syria, Iraq. Why is that? Because all these countries invest all their resources into creating this conflict with Israel. So this ideology of hate is not just for itself; it sustains the regime.
Wow.
So anyway, this is my view of why this is so widespread and why they are continually playing on this.
But you know what? It makes me a lot to think about. How the journalists report this conflict, and also how they recognize Israel, and how they report to the public. Because I don't think they're telling the truth, like most of them, sadly. Yeah.
Look, you are correct, but there are two elements here. One, as I said, there is a lot of money and influence going on in one direction, meaning many Arab countries and the Iranians too pay journalists and professors and so on, right?
Yeah.
To produce
Some facts.
Produce. So Qatar wants people to write books against Jews and Israel. And if you write a book for Israel, you won't get the money. So this is one element. But another, I think that it's coming out of a kind of I would say, ignorant education. What do I mean? I mean, people actually going to university and learning in university a kind of ignorance of receiving some kind of new Marxist theory of the world.
Yeah.
And in this Marxist theory, everything is black or white, and there are colonial powers, and there are oppressed nations, and the colonial evil powers is always the US and Europe, and of course Japan is an ally of these bad guys and so on and so forth. So they create, and on the other hand, the oppressed people in Africa and Asia. And so in this kind of dichotomy, Israel is seen as the worst because since it's very small, the fact that it exists. People say, yeah, America is bad, but it's very big and very rich. You can understand that it's successful. But how come this small country, Israel, is still successful? Why can't the forces of anti-colonialism crush it? So they create these justification. And so you have the ironical situation where you have educated people, educated in university, that are in a way more ignorant than the regular person that owns a shop. Because the person who owns a shop does not need an ideology in order to function. But the one that went to university and then went into the media, or now he's a professor, or is a producer at NHK TV or whatever, those people live in the world with an ideology that is totally false, where Israel is somehow a very powerful and evil entity. And so in this way, they create, I would say, a false picture of reality. That is my view.
Well, if you maybe I will come up with other issues, and if you could discuss it some other time, that would be appreciated. But I would also like to ask you about your foundation, the Herzl Institute, like what it does.
Sure. So basically, as I explained before about the ideas of Herzl, who was, in a sense, the founder of the the state of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
although he died many years before.
Mm-hmm.
He died 50 years before the founding of Israel.
Yes.
So when about I would say 12 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
uh, me and my colleague and good friend Dr. Yoram Fazoni uh, started the Herzl Institute. We identified two or three important points that are neglected, we think, in intellectual circles and academic circles and media circles in Israel and abroad.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to be active in these areas. And
Oh.
which are they? The first is the idea of I would say national identity,
Mm.
because at the time I think it was the high tide of a kind of globalism
Mm-hmm.
that was saying that everywhere is the same, everyone is the same,
Mm-hmm.
and in a way was working against the nation state, the very idea of national identity in the nation state.
Mm.
Now, maybe in a place like Japan,
Mm.
it's a bit different because in Japan there isn't a lot of foreign immigration and problems with immigrants. But in many countries in Europe and the US, this is a very, very strong issue.
Mm.
Not only the issue of immigration, but even more than the immigration, the problem of how to integrate immigrants into the societies. Meaning, in the past, immigrants coming to Europe or US would very rapidly become localized. They would adopt the language and the look of the people.
Mm.
But in the last two generations, the ideology of a multicultural society means that immigrants from, let's say, Muslim countries
Mm.
were encouraged not to actually blend in, but remain separate,
Mm.
and not only remain separate, but also not accept Western values of
Mm.
morality, of, let's say, marrying only one woman, of, let's say, not engaging in political violence. And so these problems, I think, are being exacerbated all the time in Western countries. And so one of the issues we wanted to deal with was the issue of nationalism, national identity. And it was a few years before these issues came to the fore with Brexit and the election of Trump
Ah,
the first
okay.
time,
Yeah.
because all these issues became very, in a sense, also in Japan, the election and relatively long rule of Shinzo Abe was the same, the expression of the same view of a reassertion of national identity
Ah,
and national
yes,
interest
exactly. Yes.
in the face of some kind of global, liberal, general
Mm.
agenda that you cannot really understand what's going on. So this was one aspect. Another is our emphasis on conservative values.
Ah,
So
yes.
conservatism
Mm-hmm.
has come to mean many things.
Mm-hmm.
In a sense, it doesn't mean anything, because if it can be everything, it's nothing. So we are working on defining better the roots and the meaning of conservatism.
So, is it a
And
kind of like academic circle that you form?
no, it's something that is closer to a think tank, but not exactly a think tank, because our we deal with some academic activity. We write books,
Mm-hmm.
we write articles, but we don't have students in the regular sense.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have all kinds of international conferences in Europe,
Oh.
in America,
Mm-hmm.
in the UK, so on, under the flag of it's called national conservatism. So using conservative ideas and national identity ideas to bring up all these issues in forums where we combine academics,
Mm-hmm.
intellectuals, policy people, and politicians together in one room, if you
Mm-hmm.
want, and they come together and view the issues from various aspects at the same time.
Oh, I see. Well, that's
And
interesting.
the,
Yeah.
And
That's
so
very
these are the
good.
two, nationalism and conservatism. And the third leg is more specifically Israeli and Jewish and Zionist, and that is why we were called the Herzl Institute, is that we not only we are investing in telling the story and researching and studying
Mm-hmm.
Jewish national tradition, conservatism, and Zionism, but also we are looking at something called political liberalism.
Ah,
Political liberalism is the impact of Jewish ideas, of Hebrew language ideas, on the general um, history and development of political ideas. So, ideas like
okay.
uh, the nation state, uh, uh, federalism, and many other ideas that I can explain later
Mm-hmm.
originate, we claim, from the Bible or from various Jewish traditions. So we are studying and publishing on that. One example is my book. Its
Mm-hmm.
name is uh, John
John
Sheldon and
Selden and
the
the
Western
Worcester.
Political Tradition. And
Yeah, I
so I'll
saw
tell
a
you
list of your
briefly about the
books
book.
and they sounded all very interesting. Yeah.
So this is the longest book. It's only 550 pages and light reading. You can read it on the bus.
Okay.
So the book is about a very important thinker
Mm-hmm.
named John Selden, who lived in Britain in the 17th century,
Mm-hmm.
at the same time with Hobbes and Grotius and Filmer. This is the period
Oh, okay, okay.
where this is the period where modern political thought developed, basically.
Hmm.
It was the end of, you could say, medieval political thought and the birth of the ideas that we today term like liberalism, conservatism, and nationalism, and so on, that we are familiar today.
Mm-hmm.
They developed in the 17th century,
Mm-hmm.
and several philosophers and thinkers, among them John Selden, uh, confronted there was a kind of intellectual crisis at the time, and Selden himself was a very, very, I would say, a scholar. Uh, he was reputed as the most educated man in England at the time. It seems that he knew something like 26 languages.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the languages he taught himself. So
Oh.
he knew, he taught himself Hebrew, although he probably never met a Jew in his life, because at that time, Jews were not living in England. So
Oh.
he learned it from books and other people, many other languages. And his work, he was also a member of parliament and a very famous lawyer. But the most important part of his work was creating a theoretical frame for justifying political and legal traditions. And why do we need that? Why is it relevant today? The reason is this. Uh, in his time, and in our time too, there are many people who are saying local traditions, national traditions, are a bit of nonsense because the only things that are real are the ones that are the same for everyone. So, if you accept that idea, you say all differences are not good; they are bad, and we should create a political system inside countries and also internationally that is based on the idea that everyone should have the same laws and that local traditions are bad. And in a sense, either all the countries in the world unite into one country, or everyone, or all the countries are a version of the same country because all of the same laws. So this view of kind of rational law, universal rational law, is the basis for liberalism. And so everyone that believes that his own tradition, his own country, his own nation has meaning is opposed to this idea of a kind of globalist liberal system. Now, the point is that if you're against the globalist liberal system, you have to offer and to explain why is my country, why is my tradition worth anything? Because if someone tells you, no, all tradition are nonsense, they are, old maid's tale, they're superstitions. The truth is only what is universal. So Selden used the Jewish traditions and the English traditions to make an argument for tradition. And his argument was this: there are some universal aspects that all humans have in common. Of course, we all need to breathe, we all need to eat, we all need to drink, of course, but no one actually lives like that. What do I mean? No one lives only by eating. You eat a certain food, and you eat Japanese food, and this guy eats Indian food, and so this is food. But of course, in culture and language, the differences are not only technical; they actually define who you are, and they are fitting to your culture and your tradition. So Selden argued different cultures are really different in the sense that if you take the let's say the constitution of Japan and you put it in another country, it won't work.
Yeah, that's true.
It's impossible to say something like, let's say, the French constitution or the American constitution is perfect. So let's give all countries the same constitution. That is false. And Selden used the image of the goat. What did he mean by the goat? He said, a goat is a goat everywhere, right? A goat is a goat in Morocco, in Scotland, in Japan, in China. But in fact, that is wrong. Of course, we see that a goat is a goat everywhere, or a horse. But in fact, if you take a goat from Morocco and a goat from Scotland and switch places, they will die.
That's
Why?
true, because of the customs.
Everywhere is used, right? To the local food, to the heat, to the cold, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So a goat in Morocco is very resistant to heat, but not very resistant to cold. If you put it in Scotland, it will die. So similarly for humans, maybe we can live in different countries, but we are fit for our society, and our society is made for us. In this sense, he gave the example of a constitution. He said, why do different countries have different constitutions? Because different countries have very different natural characteristics. So, for example, I will give you he didn't give this example, but I will give one example that is very simple. In Japan, the social norms are such that there is very little violence, and there is very little need for people in Japan to carry their guns for self-defense. In the US, always, the central government was very weak, and many people had to use guns for self-defense because they lived in isolated areas, and
they had to defend themselves, right? Basically.
Exactly. So the American Constitution puts a lot of emphasis on the right to bear arms. It's defended. The fact that you can have your own your own gun is defended because this is something vital to the American culture. In Japan, there is no such right. No one is talking in Japan all the time about should we bear arms, should we. It's not a big deal. It's not an important factor of society. Why? Because that is not a problem for Japan.
But
Japan
you know
not
what?
A very heavily police state.
Yeah, but you know what? These days, with immigration reform, I think that the police has to be heavily armed, in some time in the future, even in Japan. Yeah.
So you're saying that at this point, the Japanese police does not even carry guns, right?
But they do have guns, but they're not really trained to, like, fatally shoot a person. They're trained to, shoot a person. Yeah, like, on the.
You're right. And why is that? It's because very seldom they need to. They need maybe 2-3 times a year in all Japan. There is a very serious violent crime. Maybe there's a special unit that deals with this, but it's not very widespread. Other countries are the opposite.
Yeah.
Other countries are Mexico, for example, is
Mm.
a very, 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 and that is nothing to do with immigration. The whole crime is local. It's a culture
Yeah,
that
that's
is very,
true.
very violent.
Yeah.
People have guns, and the police is very, very large, respective to the population, and it has to shoot all the time. So what I mean is that naturally the constitution of Japan is different than the constitution of Mexico. Because if you put the constitution in Japan in Mexico, it would work, and vice versa. So this argument is Selden's argument, saying the laws, he took it from the traditional laws of the Jews. He said the laws of the Jews are the best laws in the sense that at this time there was no Jewish state. He said the Jews are accepting those laws without a government that actually imposes them, meaning that they love the laws, and those are the best laws. People who love the laws are not, the laws are not imposed by the police. I think that in Japan it's similarly. Japan is not a police state where the police imposes the laws on you. The vast majority of Japanese people are law abiding because they are used to the laws. So in this sense, a good law is a law that is fitting the population and its national character. And this argument is very, very strong argument against the idea that you can have a universal law for everyone. That you don't need special laws for Japan and special laws for India and special. Why don't we have one government all over the world and one law all over the world, in a sense, or have all governments in the world have the same laws? So basically, Selden argued, history teaches us that a country that is made out of islands will have a different constitution and characteristics and national set of mind than a country that is one territory. A large country had a different tradition than a small country, and so on and so forth. And thinking that you can have an a priori rational law for everyone is nonsense. In fact, it is worse because if you try to impose these new laws, you would destroy the local traditions and have nothing. So he used the term utopian as a bad term, meaning utopia is no place. So he said utopian laws are of no place. So, but we all live in a place, in a real place. So a utopia is a bad thing for us because we want laws that are fit to our place where we live, where our society, our customs, our friends, our family, so on lives. So he said a universal law is utopic in the bad sense, but also in a way you could say it's uchronic, meaning it's outside of time, because the importance with traditional laws that they change over time, meaning even the Jewish tradition or the Japanese tradition is continuous, but you don't. The laws in Japan today or in Israel today are not the same laws 100 or 200 years ago. They change all the time. They adapt to the local
Yes, that's what
circumstances.
that's what I was actually going to ask as well.
Exactly.
So yeah.
This adaptation, it's a gradual adaptation of the laws and the population, pushing a little bit here, a little bit there. It's not static, but a universal law and a perfect law would be the same everywhere, every time. So it will be not only utopian, really without place, also Uchronian, without time, outside of time. And Selden says that is a bad thing, because that is a law that cannot adapt to changing circumstances. It becomes oppressive. It becomes impersonal.
I
So
see.
this tradition of Selden, it took from the Jewish tradition of evolving law, living law, if you want, and it is one of various influences of political Hebraism into the mainstream of the Western political system.
Well, yeah, I probably, if you have time, you could maybe. I am very interested in the national character and also the national identity of Israeli people. Like, like as you told me, like, it's Zionism is one identity, but, like Japan. like you gave me this TPP is one of the globalism, and Japan is actually controlling TPP. And like United States is out of TPP right now, so Canada and Australia, New Zealand, basically, but um, it could be applied in a good way, but it could not work in a very good way. It's very difficult, geopolitically because of Taiwan and China. They both applied at the same time. And then, it's kind of, it's Japan is going through a very hard time right now. Like it's a challenge of national security, because of the Article 9, which means that, Japan basically, does not invade into certain territories to defend itself. But, in case of globalism, I think that Prime Minister Abe was, like you mentioned, he was very, actually, he was, in my impression, he was very, close to Israel. Yeah, very close to Israel, and also, he Jewish, populations in the United States. And I think that, he maintained a very good relationship with other nations, as Japan, not as one of the globalist countries, But I think that, I like him, I like him that way. But there are, controversial issues that, other people discuss. But regarding diplomacy, I actually, it's like Japan is now like under, I don't know, like it's a kind of like hard time, like well, it's, like conservatism and at the same time liberalism, like has to coexist together. But
Well,
there are political.
maybe we'll have a future opportunity to discuss.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm dealing with is the fact that, as I said, the term conservatism has become sometimes it's almost
Yes, I'm
meaningless
very
because people
interested.
use
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So people are actually liberals,
Mhm.
but they say I'm a conservative. In fact, they are liberals. It's interesting why they would do it, but I think that in all
Like
countries,
I would fall into that
actually,
population,
exactly.
But yeah, I just wanted to move, like, the December 25th, this happens to be Christmas, and Hanukkah, the beginning of Hanukkah. And how has your Hanukkah been? It's like you were saying
Well,
that.
it's just started because
Yeah.
unlike Christmas and the New Year,
Mhm.
which are each of them is one day, Hanukkah is 8 days.
Yes.
And Hanukkah, for those who don't know, is called the Festival of Lights,
Yes, yes, yes.
and it commemorates the battles of the Jewish fighters called Maccabees, which means hammers.
Yeah, yeah.
They were described as hammers, and they fought against the Greek Seleucid Empire that tried to destroy the Jewish population and Jewish religion.
Mhm.
And so, after long struggles, we succeeded in reclaiming our land. And so the symbolism of Hanukkah is that we light on the first day one light or one candle, on
Mhm.
the second day two, and progressively until on the eighth day
Mhm.
we have 8 lights.
Yeah. So you celebrate at home rather than at
Yeah,
synagogue?
well, in general, it's a family event, meaning
Mhm.
most Israelis
Mhm.
light the Hanukkah lights at home with our children. We say a few prayers and we have special songs. But also, it's commemorated in the public square. So a lot of places have it in the middle of the city, like Americans, Europeans have like Christmas trees. So we
Yes.
have a very big
Hanukkah.
lamp
Yeah,
with the
lamp.
lights, and many people also light the lamps in synagogue, in the middle of in workplaces. It's a very nice and wholesome ceremony.
Yeah, like my friends were saying that you make donuts.
We have Jews have special food for every holiday. So
Yes.
we have two kind of special food for Hanukkah. One is sweet donuts,
Mhm.
which are like they call sufgania.
Mhm.
They're like a ball. They are donuts, but there's no hole in the middle like in America. They
Ah.
are filled, and usually in the middle they are filled with either jam or chocolate. Now they are more even more elaborate fillings.
Oh.
And another typical Hanukkah food is called uh, leviva, which is a kind of potato, kind of more savory dish,
Oh.
kind of based on potato and various herbs.
I see. So so you have been enjoying. You have been having a good
Yes,
time.
we enjoy it very much. It's a very positive, one of the most positive holidays in the Jewish calendar. You could say that.
Well, that's very pleasing. And I'm pleased that I could invite you like during Hanukkah, holidays. And also, yeah, you mentioned that you could talk about January 1st, when Jesus Christ was
Yes. So
circumcised.
uh, first of all, Hanukkah,
Mhm.
the Hebrew and
Mhm.
the Christian calendars
Mhm.
are not exactly the same because the Hebrew calendar is according to the moon,
Ah,
and
yeah,
the
it's
Christian calendar is
like
a solar
five
one.
thousand
So
something
sometimes
years.
Hanukkah,
Yeah, right.
yes.
To this
So
year. Yeah.
sometimes Hanukkah coincides
Mm.
with Christmas and the New Year. Sometimes it doesn't.
Mm.
But Hanukkah is a very ancient. It was already commemorated more than 2,000 years ago.
Mm.
So the interesting thing is that I am raising this because sometimes lately in the on social media
Mm.
there is such a degree of ignorance that you see sometimes people arguing things like Jesus was a Palestinian
Ah.
or Jesus
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
Jewish.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted to mention that in
Mm.
the New Testament, Jesus too commemorated Hanukkah, of course, the Festival of Light.
Mm.
It's in the New Testament, in the book of
Wow.
John. But
Mm.
more interesting is to understand the Jewish reason
Mm.
why uh, uh, the 1st of January
Mm.
is the beginning of the new year in the Christian calendar. Because
Oh,
why
right.
isn't
Right. Yeah.
why isn't I mean Jesus was born
Mm.
on the 24th,
Mm.
25th,
Mm.
25th,
Mhm.
sorry, of December, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the two major holidays in the Christian calendar are Christmas and Easter.
Mm.
One was when Jesus was born, and
Mm.
another is when he was crucified and was resurrected, according to the Christian beliefs.
Mm.
So you would expect that one of those would be the new year. The new year, the Christian year, would start on that day, but it doesn't. The new year starts on 1 January, not on 25th December. So you have to ask, why is it that the Christian New Year is on 1 January and not
Mm.
on the 24th of December, 25th of December, sorry. So the point is that if you uh, uh, if you count the days from the 25th of December to the 1st of January, you count exactly 8 days. And what happens after 8 days? In many countries, nothing happens. But among the Jews, on the 8th day, a boy is circumcised and named. So that is the day where someone is named and circumcised in the Jewish tradition. So for, let's say, probably 4,000 years, Jews have been my son too. I have a son, and after he was born, after 8 days, he was named and he was circumcised. Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, the 1st of January in all the Christian calendars is the festival of the circumcision and naming of Jesus. So Jesus received his name and was circumcised according to Jewish law on the 1st of January. So, in a sense, the Christian New Year is based on the fact that Jesus was a Jew, because that is the day where he was performed on this Jewish ceremony. By the way, from this we can bring many other examples about Jesus. You can read in the New Testament, in various Gospels, repeatedly that he was Jewish, meaning that both of his parents were Jewish, that he commemorated Jewish festivals, that he went to synagogue. And there is a very famous description of where he is reading from the law in the synagogue. So clearly, Jesus was born and lived all his life as a Jew. So, in this sense, all the claims that he was not a Jew are not true. But not only that, you could say that in a sense, the Christian calendar is actually commemorating a Jewish event.
Well, actually, my grandmother was an earnest Christian. She, like some people asked what kind of sect she was. Actually, she was Methodist before the war. And she converted to Buddhism, but, it's not because she, disliked the religion. Or she, after that, even after that, she was Christian in spirit. It's something that, she had in mind from birth. And our generation, like 4 generations back, like my family, protected or persecuted Protestant, minister from Canada. And our whole entire family became Christians. So we have been like, I was actually told about Christian values from my childhood, throughout my life. And, my American friends were Christians, earnest Christians. So, but, they were Catholics, but, so they were different. They had different, customs. But yeah, like, I just cannot disconnect like Judaism from Christianity in my value. Like, it's like something in my mind that I always had. And so it's really, really difficult for me to, understand people who are anti-Semite. It's like a threat to people, like to me. So,
What can I say? People have all kinds of strange beliefs.
Yeah, but anyways, I think that probably like I have to let you go right now. But I really
Yes.
appreciate
Uh,
you
Thank you very
explaining
much.
about Herzl and about Zionism. It's really, yeah, it was very important to know what kind of like political system, like how it was founded and so forth. So, and I hope that Japanese people understand this. It's like they can read actually the subtitles of our conversation. So, but
Okay.
anyways,
Very
yeah,
good.
happy Hanukkah. And I
Thank you very much. To you too.
thank you. Yeah, I hope
Next
you
year,
have the rest.
maybe you will have Hanukkah in Israel.
Sorry.
Next year, maybe you can have Hanukkah in Israel.
Yes, I would. Yes, yes, yes. I really would like to study Hebrew.
Who knows?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, so
Thank you very much.
yeah,
It was
have
a
a nice.
pleasure.
Okay, it
Thank
was my pleasure. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. It has always been my pleasure to invite Ofir to my podcast. And I would like to plan my podcast, invite him again. And lastly, I write my blog post on my homepage. I also post on social media. Maybe you could go to my homepage, and if you could make a kind donation, that would be very much appreciated. And please do not forget to refer to your friends about this podcast and follow me on social media and also download this podcast. Okay. Have a good day, evening, or the rest of the day.